in Orange, or what county are you in? Wake?
I'd like to welcome everybody this morning, and I'd like to thank our guest speakers ahead of time. Our first guest speaker is with the Tennessee Department of Education, Dr. Michael Dooley, Executive Director for the Office of Educator, Licensure, and Preparation.
Morning, everyone. My name is Michael Derline, the Executive Director of the Office of Educator, Licensure, and Preparation in Tennessee. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to share some of the work we've done in Tennessee related to EPP annual reports and the connection to the program approval process. For a little bit of context about your neighbor to the west, this is a comprehensive list of all our approved EPPs. We have a pretty wide mix of public and private, small, medium, large. We have a few what we call education-related organizations like Teach for America. And we do not have any approved school districts, so districts could apply to become an EPP, and we have one in the pipeline right now. A little history related to data and accountability for EPPs in Tennessee. So back in 2015, we had these 7-year program review cycles with very limited links to outcomes. It was pretty inputs driven. We didn't have any sort of annual assessment of EPP performance. And we also didn't have any tools for EPPs to be able to assess their own performance and dig into data that might help them understand areas of strength and weakness. Now we're in a place where we have developed a comprehensive review process, which does happen still every 7 years, but that process is now connected directly to identified outcomes. We've also developed an annual reports performance report, which is the accountability side of the reporting that I'll share with you. And because that's annually, we do have thresholds that may result in what we're calling an interim review, which would require the provider to take action between the 7-year cycle. And then we've also developed what we call the insights tool, gives EPPs an opportunity to really dig into their data at a very granular level, and I'll share that with you as well. So governance structure, it's actually fairly straightforward. The Department of Education presents policy recommendations to the board. We develop guidelines and procedures for implementation. Related to the review process, we appoint the review team, and then ultimately we make recommendations to the board for approval. The state board sets policy, reviews the recommendations, and makes EPP approval decisions. One other, I think, important point to note about educator preparation in Tennessee: there are 2 pathways that EPPs can choose to go through the review process. One is with a CAPE team, and the other is with a state-appointed team. And the CAPE team obviously would result in accreditation or not, and that informs our decision whether to recommend approval to the state board. And it's not always the case that accreditation necessarily means that we would recommend approval, but that's part of the information we use in making a recommendation. And I think at this point, about 60% of our providers are nationally accredited. And our comprehensive review has a number of components to it: the professional education standards, those in-task standards, the literacy standards, which are fairly new in Tennessee and we now have across most endorsement areas, specialty area or content standards. The CAPE standards are used in the review process. And then we also use annual reports, as I've noted, as part of the review process. So we revisited our program review and approval process because we really wanted to create a robust process that would meet Tennessee's needs and then build on the CAPE standards that we realized needed some clarification. And so we've really spent a lot of time getting what those expectations are, getting some feedback. We also wanted to create a process that would allow EPPs to really think internally and use the information from a review and from annual reports to improve their own practice. And then again, we wanted to integrate both the qualitative work that EPPs are doing and the assessment the review teams make, as well as the quantitative annual reports data. So this is just kind of an illustration of something we are about to release, the Tennessee Comprehensive Review Handbook. And this is an example of a CAPE standard and component, and we have a series of prompts that we ask the provider to respond to. We have a number of required file uploads. And then we have a very clear rubric that we've spelled out at 4 levels that will allow review team members to clearly assess the quality of the evidence that's submitted. And then this will probably make more sense in a moment, but every 7 years now, the review will also consist of an assessment as to whether the provider met expectations in the most recent performance reports. So we've pulled out every metric from our accountability report and tied it to a CAPE standard. Through an IES grant that we received, a $3.5 million grant just a few years ago, we're also building a system, a platform to be able to conduct reviews. Historically, that process has either been paper-based or flash drive-based or website-based. We're now standardizing this to the point of including everything, all our evidence requests in one single place. And this is kind of just an overview of our timeline for releasing that system. It will begin using it fully with comprehensive reviews that take place next year. And now I'll dive a little bit deeper into the annual reports. I want to make sure that I have time to go into the system and demo that for you and leave some time for questions. But again, the annual reports are split up into 2 different tools, one being the performance report. And this report was really one created in partnership with a group we call the Educator Preparation Working Group. And what we did was, first we released the Insights tool, which I'll share in a moment as well, which had a ton of data that we were giving back to EPPs at a very granular level. And then we worked with that Educator Preparation Working Group to identify what we believe to be the most critical metric that all EPPs should demonstrate meeting some threshold. And so this performance report does just that. And you'll see in a moment that we've selected specific metrics across 4 different domains, soon to be 5. And we've set thresholds for each metric and also thresholds for how many metrics you need to meet within a domain to meet the domain overall, and then how many domains you need to meet expectations on the performance report. So this is just a screenshot. In a moment, I'll go into the system and show you how this works and how EPPs interact with it. But as you can see, it's just a very succinct kind of display of whether the provider meets expectations or not across domains like candidate recruitment and selection, all the way to completer effectiveness and impact. This is just a graphic that kind of illustrates that interim review process. So annual reports are obviously released annually. If the provider is meeting expectations at the overall level, then they just continue operating and reporting every year. If they don't, then they enter this, if they don't in 2 consecutive years, they enter this interim review process. So this year will be the first year that we engage with an EPP in this process. Last year, spring of 2018 was the first year that we released a performance report, and we're about to release the second performance report. And we anticipate that at least a couple of providers may fall into this interim review category. And so we're going to work closely with them to kind of require that they conduct a root cause analysis and propose some revisions to their program that may impact the outcomes that we're seeing in their annual reports. again, going back to our purpose, we wanted to both provide a tool that can be used for accountability, but also one that EPPs can use to better understand what's driving their outcomes. And so we have also created this tool called the Insights tool that is very, very granular level data that you can kind of slice and dice. And again, this is just a screenshot, and I'll show you in a moment how the system works. But there are a number of filters within domain. You can look by metric. You can disaggregate by endorsement program area or clinical pathway or program type, be it undergraduate or graduate. I'll come back to this slide, but I wanted to jump into the system now. Hopefully this will work without any challenges. Can you all see my browser right now?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so let me type that in. One of our universities is kind enough to basically let us use them as the example every time we do this. And this is the TN Atlas system. It's not completely finished yet, but many aspects of it are. And right now I will go over to the annual reports. And we'll cross our fingers that we don't have any technical glitches. Okay, so this is the 2017 annual report for Cumberland University. Again, in just a couple weeks, we'll be releasing the 2018, and that's reflective of data through cohorts 2016-17, and the data is inclusive of 3 cohorts. So it is a little bit lagged, but mostly that's because we need to be able to determine if folks get employed and then generate their evaluation data that we can present back to this system. So I'm going to start with the Insights tool. So right now we're looking at 3-year values, 2013 through 16 cohorts. And these are our 5 domains. I think probably the most interesting one is completer effectiveness and impact. And so the EPP can see in this section aggregated data. So right now they're looking at the top here, overall level of effectiveness rating, which in Tennessee is made up of 3 components, value-added data, an achievement measure, and observation data. So this includes anyone who was either a program completer and was employed and generated this data, or anyone who was in what we call a job-embedded preparation program where they were doing their clinical practice and completing coursework while serving as teacher of record. So the provider can see at each level the percentage of folks who had that level, as well as the percentage of level 3+. And then I'll show you this section is all related to value-added data, observation in the data in the aggregate, and then we go so far as
observation data.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Can you explain observation data? What's the tool?
Yeah.
Who does the observations?
Yeah. So the tool is the team rubric. So in Tennessee, the vast majority of districts use the same rubric. So this is a rubric that is used in the field by principals, assistant principals, anyone who's been approved to be an evaluator. And so we've been able to pull data from our evaluation system for the vast majority of districts and schools at this specific level. So what you're seeing here, starting with this section, is the domain level data for educators who were in the classroom either following program completion or enrolled in a job embedded program. And then down here, you see it at the indicator level. So the provider is able to see kind of which areas their educators are excelling at. So for example, Cumberland is kind of above, and I apologize, I didn't explain what these bubbles represent. The bubble represents the EPP data, and the line represents the state level data.
Mm.
So you can kind of do a quick scan and see that there are some areas where this EPP is doing well and some areas where they're kind of average. And then with other EPPs, you can see a little more differentiation. But this gives them kind of a first attempt at being able to see where their strengths and weaknesses might be. And oh, and it is also a 1 to 5 scale. So this is an average.
And do the EPPs use this rubric in their training, or maybe they do, maybe they don't? You don't know?
I think it varies. I think at this point, if you would have asked me that 6 years ago when I first started here, I think it would have been pretty inconsistent. Now I think more are using it than are not. I have heard that they have had to make some slight revisions to the rubric because these are not, for the most part, in-service teachers. But they are, I think, using it more often than not.
Right. Yeah.
Now, this is really kind of where the power lies in being able to disaggregate the very data we just looked at by either endorsement area, cluster of endorsement areas. So what we've done there is we've taken, for example, the core academic secondary endorsements and we've grouped them together. And that's especially helpful for some of the smaller providers that may not have enough data at that endorsement level. We've also disaggregated it by clinical type. So student teaching, internship, and job embedded clinical practice are our 3 options. And then program type, which is undergraduate or graduate. I'm going to click on endorsement area so you can see what this looks like. So now underneath this EPP metrics section, you have a details by endorsement area section. So this is now splitting up the specific endorsement areas and looking at the same observation data. So they can see, for example, let's take one that has some variation. Motivating students is one where their elementary education program is above the state average, whereas their history program falls below, their special ed program falls below. Their English program is excelling. So they can kind of start to think about what are they doing in these programs that are seeing better results that they may not be doing in the others, or maybe what's happening in clinical practice. If they're seeing a pattern across programs, they can choose to focus their efforts with clinical mentors or supervisors on those areas.
Michael, a quick question. On the very far right,
sure.
In very faint gray, is that the sample size?
It's 5. 5.
No. So, and I'm not sure, Hugh, do you know why this is not popping up with end counts or anything? Usually when I create this, when a tooltip, it should pop up and give me the end count. But right now it doesn't seem to be doing that. I'm not sure why. We're going to have to look into that. But that 5 represents the 5 on the rubric.
Got it.
So,
okay.
Yeah, this is the 1 to 5 scale.
Got it. So do you limit disaggregation to a certain size? Or in this view?
Yes, 10.
An N of 10, okay.
Yeah, 10 is kind of our suppression rule. So we don't present any data if it's fewer than 10 individuals.
Thank you.
Yeah. 2, 3 plus. Oh.
Michael, can you go back to the what I call the demographic profile, the other page?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time understanding the question.
Could you go back to the demographic, the other page, the demographic profile? I don't know what it's called on here, like how many teachers, you pulled it up
This
first.
one.
Yeah,
I think you're referring to this one?
yes. So
Okay.
when you're in race and ethnicity and details, where does that, how does that rank? Are those rated on a rubric? Like, could someone get dinged, so to say, if they don't have a certain percentage of completers of underrepresented race, ethnicity, or Asian, or African American, or Hispanic?
So this is, I think I understand your question, but this is representative of just presenting the data as is. So this is just a percentage of the completers or candidates.
Right, just who they have, right? Yeah.
Now, where you might be getting to a rubric or an evaluation of the outcomes would be on the performance report. So this is again where we set thresholds. So if you go to candidate recruitment and selection, now you can see that within each metric, I'm getting quite a bit of feedback. You can see within each metric, there is a threshold set. So if I hover over underrepresentation, the expectation is at the top. So for this one, the expectation was that either the EPP has 22% of their 3-year cohort from an underrepresented racial and or ethnic group, or that the percentage of candidates from the first group increased to the last group. And so we present all the data related to that expectation, and then a check if the EPP meets expectations, and an X if they do not.
Okay, thank you.
And then over here, when you hover over the domain expectations, it kind of tells you how many metrics you have to meet in order to meet the domain overall. We also have a technical guide for this that spells all of this out that I'll be happy to share with you.
So why didn't they meet the minimum undergraduate GPA?
Say that one more time.
Why did they not meet the minimum undergraduate GPA?
So there are some kind of contextual things that might be helpful there. So the expectation is that 95% of the undergraduate candidates meet the minimum policy requirement. However, state board policy allows for an appeals process.
Okay.
So it's possible that they may have admitted some folks on appeal.
Okay, thank you.
So again, each domain has a set of metrics. So if we look at effectiveness and impact, and this is a domain that the EPP must meet in order to meet expectations overall. But we have a metric for overall level of effectiveness, value added ratings, and observation ratings. And each has a threshold associated with it as well. And then coming back to the main performance report page, we've set a number of things you must meet in order to meet. So we also have a technical guide. That's not working. And we have a data collection dictionary here, though. Over the years, we've gotten much better at collecting the data at the central location. So the majority of this data comes from our Compass licensure system. And we ask EPPs to verify their folks at any data that we may not have in the system. So I'll make sure that you all have a copy of the annual report's technical guide, which I know this is kind of a crash course in annual reports, but that kind of spells out the thresholds and expectations we have, as well as the disaggregation levels for the tools. And I'd be happy to take any questions if you have any others.
I have a question. My question is, how many years have you used this, and are these the same metrics, or did the metrics change after? Did you have kind of a ramp up system, or did you just start with your metrics and then people just fell out one way or the other?
So I think if I understand your question, these metrics were set 2 years ago. And initially what we did was release the insights tools. We did not use the accountability portion of the report. And the purpose there was to get EPPs kind of used to working with that data and understanding some of the metrics that we cared about. And last year, the threshold specific metrics maintained thresholds and metrics this year as well. The one area that we anticipate will add to the report that has some challenges with statistically is related to completer and employer satisfaction. So we are working on standardized tools that we can use those surveys, and then we need to the educator preparation working group back to determine the appropriate threshold to include on the performance report.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
So
Other questions?
Yeah, I have two. So just for clarity, how many staff are working on this project in this division?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, if you're just referring to annual reports, we've got 2 people that work on annual reports. We hired a data analyst back in September who spends probably the majority of the year, or will spend the majority of the year working on this project, because data collection happens, or data validation happens in the spring, and analysis really starts by August and doesn't end until right about now. And then we shift to QAing the system itself once we work with our state vendor. I will also note that the first time we worked with a third-party vendor, and the costs were much higher than they are when we decided to shift to our state team that works with the project. So we're happy about that.
This was a part of the $3.5 million grant from a couple of years ago. Is this like the outcome of that, or were there other things tied to that grant?
The annual reports itself were not tied to that grant. Okay. The vehicle by which we released them to EPPs was. So the TN Atlas system was tied to the grant. But if we didn't have that grant, we would still be producing annual reports. We just might have to post them on our website or something to that effect. So the grant was really focused on building the TN Atlas system to be able to conduct the review process, as well as conducting some pretty significant projects related to examining the effectiveness of clinical mentors and clinical practice design.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Michael. One thing that we've been talking about is kind of come up in our subcommittee work is how we.
Who is that?
Sorry, Andrew. I thought it was Dr. Graham talking.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, Michael, it's come up in our discussions, how we, we have certain EPPs who a significant number of their graduates end up teaching out of the state of North Carolina.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious how you all factor that in. Do you count those people? Do you only count the folks who end up, graduating or being in job embedded programs in Tennessee? Just kind of curious how you all have tackled that.
Yeah, great question. And that's one that came up often in our conversations with our working group. One decision that we made because of that was to not include initial employment on the accountability report. What I didn't show you are the metrics that are in the employment and retention domain. Currently, the only metric there is retention. So that would only include individuals who were at least employed for a single year in Tennessee and then were employed for a second year. We have not really tried to make attempts to collect data from out of state or rely on EPP's self-reported data. But that was, again, kind of the conscious decision that we made, because we also have some providers who are primarily focused on teachers in the Catholic schools or other non-public settings. And as a result of that, we do have some providers that just don't meet expectations on even the retention metric, or don't have enough educators employed initially to even be counted in that metric. And the expectation there is because we have this multiple measures approach, there's really not a single metric that can make it such that the EPP doesn't meet expectations overall. So we have definitely had conversations about that, but our focus has been on retention of the educators that do get employed in Tennessee, and then also just having kind of a broad approach to the metrics that we consider for accountability.
Oh. I have a question.
Okay.
I apologize for coming in at 9:30. I thought this meeting started at 9:30, not at 9:15. So I didn't get the beginning of your presentation. And I did wonder, has all this done anything to drive improvement of educator preparation? And maybe you don't know that for sure yet, or I'd like to hear some comments about that. If so, how has that happened?
Yeah, great question. So I do think it's a little early to be able to point to specific things that we're seeing, like, for example, statewide increases in first year employment or observation data, but that is where we're headed. We want to be able to influence that. What we can say is that we have a number of EPPs who are using these reports in a very significant way. So they are deciding to make changes to program offerings, or change the way that they are approaching clinical practice, and ensure that their clinical mentors have training in specific areas. So we have seen examples of EPPs using the data and responding to it in very proactive ways. Mm-hmm. But yes, I think where we're headed is we want to see if there's an upward trend of outcomes. I think right now we're just very happy that we didn't produce these, especially the insights tool part of it, because everybody pays attention to the accountability side. But we're happy that we produced the insights tool, and that people are actually using it.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to thank Michael for his presentation and for taking his time out of his busy schedule to be here with us today. And if anybody else has any other questions for him, we can also email him any future questions that we might have. But I want to go ahead and be able to allow Georgia Department of Education, Penny McRoy and Joy Feth. They are with the Educator Preparation Division. Penny is the director, and Joy is the Educator Preparation Division Data and Analyst.
Yes, if you'll give, thank you. If you'll give those rights to me, I will share our presentation.
Okay.
Thank you all. I'm going to hop off. I've got another
Thank
meeting
you.
to go to.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, thank you all. Good morning. My name is Penny McRoy, and I am going to cue up my slideshow here. I'm the Director of Educator Preparation at the Georgia Professional Standards Commission. We are based in Atlanta, as you might guess, and I'm joined this morning by Joy Cece, who is our data analyst for the Educator Preparation Division, and Joy will be sharing with you a little bit later a demonstration of our dashboard. It's great to follow Michael this morning. We always learn from our partners to the north when we share presentation time with him. So thank you for that opportunity. And we're so glad to share with you the work that we've done to develop our accountability model. I'm going to present a quick overview, with you a little bit about the development of our system, and then Joy is going to give you a quick dive into our secure dashboard that our program providers now have access to, and then I'll talk a little bit more about implementation, and we will save time for questions, and we look forward to your questions. You had some great questions for Michael. So our system is called the Preparation Program Effectiveness Measures, PPEM or PPEM. Sometimes we use an S there. But we have essentially these measures for two types of programs: teacher preparation programs and leader preparation programs. Our service field preparation programs, we do not have effectiveness measures for those yet. We are considering that for the future, but for now, these two types of programs are included in our system. And our number one purpose here is program improvement. And I'm hearing a little bit of an echo. Is my audio okay on your end?
It is for us.
Okay, thank you. So in addition to program improvement, we have, of course, the responsibility for being transparent to the public, to parents, to potential students. And then, of course, accountability is one of the purposes, as that really, in the beginning, was the number one driver for this process. But as we have evolved, we've shifted to really focus on program improvement. So for our teacher preparation program effectiveness measures, we have the components that are shown here. And for this, for the teacher program, there is an even 50-50 split among measures that happen during a program and then measures that happen after program completion. And the program measures, I believe you're probably familiar with the EdTPA. I believe North Carolina is implementing the EdTPA. EdTPA became consequential in Georgia in 2015-16. So as you can see, that makes up a significant portion of the 50% for the program measures. GACE stands for the Georgia Assessment for the Certification of Educators. That is our content assessment, and our content assessments are customized for the state of Georgia by ETS. Now, over on the outcome side, we have teacher assessment, for the teacher assessment on performance standards, TAPS is the acronym that you see there, and that's the classroom observation. That's the summative observation. Those are conducted by school administrators. and we use that in our system. Georgia has a statewide effectiveness system for P-12 schools, and so this is the measure that is used consistently across the state in our public schools and our public charter schools. And then we have surveys. These surveys were developed by stakeholders, by practitioners. We validated the surveys and we administer the surveys and make all of the data available to the program providers. And when Joy walks you through the demonstration of the dashboard, you'll see the level of detail that the program providers receive for these surveys. Now, for the leader preparation program effectiveness measures, we have a similar system. However, there is not that 50-50 split here, as you can see. We have two tiers of leadership preparation. Tier 1 is for individuals who are preparing to become an assistant principal or perhaps someone who works at the central office level but does not supervise principals. And then Tier 2 is for those who are preparing to become a building leader or a system level leader who supervises principals. And so the GACE, the content assessment at Tier 1, is what you would think of as a content assessment. It's the typical multiple choice instrument. The PASL, the performance assessment for school leaders, is a portfolio performance-based assessment. It's similar to the EdTPA. So the GACE is administered at Tier 1. The PASL is administered at Tier 2. And then for leader preparation programs, we also collect the LAPS, which is the leader assessment on performance standards. Again, that summative observation that is completed in the field. And both this instrument and the teacher instrument generate the data for our system at the end of the first year in that leadership position. And here we have surveys, and you're seeing something different here. There's a completer survey. So this completer survey is administered at the end of the preparation program. Now, we do this for teacher preparation programs, but I'm going to go back a slide because you don't see that included in the TPPEM. The completer survey is included in the leader effectiveness measure at the request of our stakeholders. We have an advisory council, and as we were working to refine the leader measures based on the implementation of this two-tiered system, they said, we want that completer survey included. We think it's valuable data. We think it's important for program improvement. And so we agreed to include that there. So we have the three surveys, the one that's administered at the end of the program, and then the inductee survey, which is administered at the end of the first year in a leadership position, and this is after program completion, obviously, and then the survey of that inductee employer. Now, all of these data are combined to create an EPP level, an institution or agency level, College of Ed, whatever it may be, rating. And we have the 4 levels here. Level 1 is low performing, level 2 is at risk of low performing, and then level 3 effective. That's what we expect our program providers, where we expect them to perform. And then level 4, exemplary. We are working now on how this will be applied at the program level. For now, it is applied at the EPP level. I did not mention at the beginning of the presentation that just for a bit of context, we have 72 program providers. That includes 40 institutions and 22 non-traditional or alternate route providers. These are typically at regional education service agencies. I know you have those in North Carolina, so you can imagine the context there. They operate our alternate route to teacher certification programs, and we apply the same standards and the same approval process to those programs as we do to the institution-based programs. So in terms of our developmental process, we've really had two phases of development. And the first phase began in conjunction with our Race to the Top grant. This system was included in our grant application, and so a committee comprised of some education stakeholders obviously developed the first round of what this system would look like. We engaged stakeholders in that process. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a moment, but I think what's really interesting in terms of our development is the fact that some policy changes prompted significant changes in our system. About the time we were ready to get this system up and running, we had legislative changes in our state that impacted our P12 statewide effectiveness system. And to keep a long story short, in essence, those changes removed our ability to use student growth data in our effectiveness measure system, because the legislative change gave flexibility to school systems to decide which student growth data they use at the school level and at the district or system level in their effectiveness system. And so because there's really not a statewide consistent method for calculating that at the school level, we were unable to use those data in our system. Now, a second change that I've already mentioned is the fact that we transitioned from a single-tiered system for educational leadership preparation and certification to a two-tiered system, the Tier 1 and the Tier 2 that I mentioned earlier. So because of those changes, we had to go through the second phase of development. Now, as I alluded to a moment ago, stakeholder engagement has been extensive throughout both of these phases. We've had task forces dating back to 2012 that were comprised of P12 representatives, principals, teachers, central office representatives. We've had representatives from our professional associations, our teacher and leader and superintendent associations. We've had representatives from other state agencies, obviously from the Department of Education, from which we are separate, and then from our university system, and from our program providers. And so this extensive engagement by stakeholders has really helped us in terms of the buy-in and in terms of just simply having that level of understanding among the EPP. And that's pretty consistent with how we operate in Georgia. Now, we did develop about 3 years ago an advisory council, and this is a standing group. They're going to continue on as long as we need them. They meet twice a year, and they advise us on implementation issues, and they have been instrumental in helping us make some important decisions related to not only the measures, one example being that inclusion of the completer survey, but also the scaling, the cut lines, if you will, in terms of how those ratings are determined, and a number of other issues related to outreach and communication. And so they've just been invaluable to us. The process has been very iterative up to this point. We've gone through several cycles of what you see here, of collecting the data until EdTPA was consequential. We went through this process with available data. Then once EdTPA became available, we included that and went through this process again. And then we've gone through it again. We'll do the same thing with the leader preparation effectiveness measures when the data resulting from that model is completely available. Right now, we don't have data from the performance assessment, the PASL. So again, we've been able to model the calculations and the impact on the rating and share those with our advisory council, get their feedback, and then refine. And this has been an important part of our development process. Now, I want to kick it over to Joy. And so, Kimberly, if you will please make Joy Specie the presenter now. She's going to walk you through a demonstration of our dashboard. And as she's getting that set up, I want to just point out again that this is the secure dashboard for program providers. This is not available to the public. This is a private dashboard. We provide a great deal of information to our program providers here. So I'm happy to be able to show this to you today.
All right, thank you, Penny. If you're ready, I'll go ahead and share our dashboard with you guys. So what you're seeing right now, Joy. Thank you. What you're seeing right now is dummy data, fake data for the purpose of display, because you can see our program provider that I have selected is the Georgia Professional Standards Commission, which is ourselves rather than a real provider. And I'm going to just kind of give you a flying look at this dashboard. So this is as Penny mentioned, it is the internal secure dashboard that only EPPs themselves can see right now. It's really, really numbers heavy and really, really visual light. That's semi-intentional, and also just due to the fact that the public version is going to have a lot more visuals. We're still working on those, and so this really doesn't have a visual / design layer slide over the top of just what's here. But EPPs have loved it, to be honest. They love getting data. They love looking at the numbers and seeing their own stuff. So here we're on the little landing page. This is actually the PPEM overall tab. So you can see this imaginary provider has an overall rating of level 3. They earned a total of 167 points compared to the statewide and similar EPP average. That similar EPP, we were initially using the Carnegie classifications, but because that's at the entire EPP level, that an EPP education preparation provider, because of the EPP level, it hasn't worked out real well, real consistently. And you'll also then see how they earn points on individual measures. You'll note that these points are not going to add up to anything like 167. That's because ours is on a scale, mouse over, of 100 to 200. And we did that to avoid confusion with common classroom scales. So probably a lot of providers don't really spend a ton of time here, though, when they're looking at this across the top. They're going to see, okay, so how am I doing on the EdTPA? And this one isn't loading. It's fake data, so it acts differently than the real dashboard does sometimes. Okay, GACE, this is better. So GACE, you can see that they've got a level 4. This is not consequential. This label, it's just purely there to help them know where they are in relation to the other measures. But the GACE, again, that's our content assessment. You see right here on the top left, a calculation kind of module that always appears there in that position on every tab. It's the consequential tab. You can see they're earning 16.5 points out of 20. You can see some more technical details, and you can see the number of completers who contributed data to that overall score. Then you're also seeing, again, the same breakdown. This EPP, all EPPs, and similar EPPs. They really like that. In fact, when I show them this stuff, I always encourage them, when you're looking at your stuff, look at it both vertically and horizontally. Look at yourself to see, all right, on a scale of me, which one of these domains am I struggling in, which ones am I doing well in, but then also compared to others. Where do I have areas where I'm ahead of the game? Where do I have areas where I'm behind? Maybe where do I have others where I'm behind in the sense of in relation to other domains. But other similar EPPs are also struggling with that. So maybe I have a team there in looking to improve if I can cooperate, coordinate with those other EPPs. So again, you're seeing the technical details, you're seeing some average overall, and then ours is a 4 level. We use actually on the TAP, we use the summative score because it offers greater differentiation, but we also like to show them how they're doing on the overall rating for the teachers. So you can see why we're using the sum score, which is sort of a raw score, because basically the whole state is getting a level 3. That is not by design, but it is what it is. We've got to work with the data that we're getting. We're getting this from the P12 world. You can see that this imaginary provider, even with this level of differentiation, the expected level is level 3. This may not look a lot like a lot of level 2s, but you can see that they have almost twice as many level 2s amongst their candidates, their completers, as the rest of the state does. So that's a significant difference there. At the survey level, we get into some really fun stuff. Well, we also warn them. If there's a low end, we show them, that's not going to affect you. We'll show you your data if it's a low end, but it does not count either for or against you. So actually, we use one that doesn't have a low end. So at the survey level, this is a 4, 3, 2, 1 scale. 0 doesn't count against them. And we've got, again, the same concept where they're compared to themselves. They can look vertically, compare to themselves, and they can also look horizontally and look at others. And this is something that they have loved. So our surveys are aligned to the INTAS standards, and we have shown that alignment, and then we've aggregated it up at the INTAS level. When they're doing CAPE accreditation and happen to give data for that, they have just loved already having the survey data aggregated for them. This is maybe one of our biggest kind of bling things. When they open this up and they see it, their eyes get all starry and they get thrilled. That's their supplementary information. So last down. We've got some supplemental data for them. This is information that is potentially useful to them in improving. If you remember from Penny's second, third slide, our first listed purpose for this is to help programs to improve. So we give them stuff that is not necessarily going to be consequential, that maybe we consider consequential at some point, but no longer is. So we show them practice. That's the cooperating teacher, how many years of experience that person has. They love seeing this stuff. The demographics of themselves compared to other completers. And this is something that they've also loved, the comparison of where their folks are going to teach. So if this is an imaginary provider, in Athens Gwinnett, are they all going here? Are they going southeast? Are they coming to the metro area? And then finally, SGP, this is the student growth percentile rating, only available for 2 subject areas, but there they are. And then finally, we've also got an export for them because some of them, we heard stories about them copying and pasting individual numbers, and we said, why don't I just give you an export, get it all in Excel? Do I have any questions? And I can go back to other tabs if necessary if you guys want me to show some other data. Okay, great. Then we can give it back to Penny.
When's the first year that you used this? Was it in 2015?
Yeah, so, that's a really good question. So this was calculated in it was asked the first year of this. It was calculated in the 2018 fiscal year, but I think I'm going to crosstalk. But we use 3 years of data in order to maximize our n sizes. So we have data in this starting in we actually calculated it in 2018, and this is a beta year. It's not consequential yet for them. It will be starting this summer. A new one will be starting this summer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. And that was a great question. We're going to give you time to ask more questions in just a few moments.
Penny, would you like
Kim, can you make me the presenter again?
Sure.
So what year did you go back and I'm going to call it recalibrate, when you looked at your data points? And I believe you said that in your presentation. There was a time when you went back and kind of recalibrated some numbers or some metrics. Was that after the first review, like the first year, or when was that?
We're going to answer that question in just a moment, if you'll bear with me. That's such an important question. And I think this timeline slide is going to help explain that. Because of those two phases of development, we had to slow down a little bit. So you see here, 2014-16, a 2-year, in essence, pilot happened. And during this phase, we were kind of transitioning. I'm getting a lot of echo.
We're not hearing it.
Okay, good. I will power through. Sorry about that. We were in the process of transitioning from the original design to what you see, this new design. But we continued to collect data and model where we could. The big emphasis in this time frame was developing that dashboard that you just saw. One of the things that we kind of had to slow down and wait on was the consequential implementation of EdTPA. That began in the academic year 2015-16. So we had to wait until the people that took that consequentially completed and then got jobs. Our system is predicated on the fact that we're using data from individuals who completed programs and were employed in public schools or public charter schools in the field in which they were prepared. And so Joy alluded to this, the in count issue. We end up losing a lot of people who either go teach out of state. Michael mentioned this too. I believe one of you asked a question about this. We lose folks who go teach out of state or who are hired in Georgia but are teaching out of field. And so that becomes an issue. And if you have more questions about that, we'll be glad to speak to that when we get to the questions section. Now, in 27-18, that's the last academic year, we had a non-consequential year of implementation, and that's when this dashboard became available to our program providers. We did a lot of outreach during this time, a lot of technical assistance with our program providers to make sure they understood what is available to them and that they know how to use that dashboard. Joy mentioned that export tool. That's one example of how we listened to them and we provided that tool to them. A number of other things that you saw there in the dashboard are the results of suggestions that we received from our program providers. So this year, 2018-19, the data that are being generated now represent the first year of consequential implementation. And this summer, we will release our public dashboard. As Joy mentioned, that is going to provide less detail and it will be more visually oriented, more graphically oriented, I should say. And so that really begins, the data from this year really begin the consequential implementation and then the implications in terms of approval. This next slide, I hope you will enjoy the colors. It is color coded. We are educators, but these colors correspond to colors that we will use on our public dashboard to denote these levels of performance. You have this, you may have this as a handout. And so I know it's hard to read here, but I think an important point here is that one of our goals is to recognize and reward the program providers that are performing at that exemplary level. So you see publication of exemplary status, service as peer expert mentors, opportunities to share exemplary practices. And these are plans that we have to essentially reward them. We're working now on options for streamlining approval processes. Like Tennessee, we have a 7-year approval cycle. We have institutions that pursue CAPE accreditation. Our state system is very similar to the CAPE approval system. So, and we use the same standards. And so our providers essentially meet the CAPE standards whether they choose to seek national accreditation or not. So this system kind of sits alongside that, and wherever we can within our state system, we want to streamline that process for these exemplary providers. We want to reward them in a way that is meaningful to them. Another important point that I hope you can take away from this is that our intention is to identify those providers that are struggling and step in early to assist them. So you see terms like action plans and monitoring and technical assistance, on-site technical assistance. And then of course, as the years progress, you see probation. So our goal is to help program providers before they reach that point of probation. And so to summarize the sanctions that we have, and they're in order here of severity, we start with action plans. If they're performing at one of those 2 lowest levels, we ask them to develop an action plan, and we are preparing a template to provide them for that purpose. They will be able to modify that as they need, but we are starting with a consistent template because we will have to monitor those plans at some point along the line. Peer assistance is voluntary. We know that this is something that we cannot compel program providers to do, but we do have a lot of collaboration in our state, and we expect that there will be exemplary providers that will be willing to do this. And we're not putting a lot of guardrails around this. We want to keep it simple. Obviously, we're not going to mandate what it's going to look like. It could be as simple as a phone call and an email, or it could include a visit. The monitoring is something that we will do. The monitoring we expect will help us identify early those problems so that we know what type of technical assistance we need to provide, so that, for instance, we know which exemplary performer we need to call on to say, hey, would you be willing to help this provider who's struggling in a particular area? Probation, we hope will not happen, but of course, if a provider does not improve over time, then this would be a decision that our commission would make. And once a provider is on probation, they automatically go into this phase of having another approval review, which will result in either continued approval or revocation of approval. Now, we haven't gotten to that point yet because, as I mentioned, we're in the first year of collecting the consequential data. So it's 3 or 4 years down the road before we know how that will pan out. Now, as I mentioned, support is important to us. These are some of the examples of the types of support that we provide. We've done webinars. Joy is continuing to do webinars that have been well attended, where she really dives deep into the metrics, how they are scaled and indexed, and how they are presented in the dashboard. We have done presentations. We've done data labs. Those have been one-on-one. deep dives into the dashboard at statewide conferences. Data conversations are happening among our staff who work directly with the program providers. And these are informal conversations. The agendas are driven by the program providers, but they're giving us a really good opportunity to learn how the program providers are consuming these data. And we're already seeing examples of how they are using the data in the dashboard to drive improvements to their programs. We have a website that is dedicated to this PPEM system. It has links to all the resources, the technical specifications, FAQs, presentations, webinars that we've recorded. And we have developed this data reconciliation process that we use as needed. And this is for when a provider logs into the dashboard and they see data that don't necessarily match with what they were expecting. And this gives them an opportunity to know that they have a voice, that there is a process that they use to contact us and to say, hey, I'm not feeling right about this. And then Joy goes through this process with them to determine where the mismatch is and why it's occurring. And then, as I mentioned, we are providing one-on-one technical assistance as needed. One thing that has been extremely helpful for us is the fact that we have an association in Georgia for assessment directors, the Georgia Association of Assessment Directors. And that group is extremely active. They're well organized. They have bylaws and everything and officers, and they meet twice a year, and they invite us to meet with them and to provide information and updates and to conduct workshops with them on the PPEM. And I believe that this one thing has helped tremendously in terms of establishing the relationship and the trust that they have in us related to this system. So as you can see here, we now are at the point where we're shifting from talking about the nuts and bolts and the technical aspects of the system to really intentionally focusing on how the data are used for program improvement. In preparation for the opening or the launching of the public dashboard this summer, and working now to provide opportunities in the fall and next spring for our exemplary performers to share some of their effective practices. So I'm going to stop now and invite your questions. What questions do you have about our system? And we'll be glad to go back and show you anything that you want to see in more detail. Did I answer that one question about the timeline?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're
How
welcome.
have your higher ed institutions received this? Like,
Oh, that is a great question. Our higher ed institutions have been involved in the development of the process all along the way since 2012. Higher ed deans and faculty have been members of the task force, and we've also had members of the task force from the university system office. And so, you know, to the extent that those who were engaged in the task force work have been involved, I would say the buy-in and the acceptance have been high. Of course, there have been some who were not engaged and who were not as ready, I guess, for that dashboard to open. but we've had opportunities to work with them in small group settings and one-on-one. Our structure provides for staff. We have 4 staff members who are dedicated to working with our institutions. So we've got 40 institutions. So each of those 4 staff members work with 10 institutions. And so they have good relationships with them and opportunities to work with them one-on-one. And that's helped.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions? Well, we really appreciate Penny and Joy to take time out of their busy schedules as well and to introduce us to Georgia's accountability model and sanctions. If there are any other questions later on, I'm sure that we can communicate through email.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm realizing that I went over a little bit, and I apologize for that.
That's fine.
We appreciate the opportunity to share with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You are most welcome.
So, for our members, there will be another subcommittee meeting. The first one is for assessment and performance, and I believe that is on the 15th. And then for educator preparation, it is on the 20th of March. Both of them are in March. Different times, I can't remember the exact times. I sent out the calendar reminders this morning. So if you didn't receive that or an email, let me know.
Thanks, Kim.
Sure. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. I'll talk to you guys.
Yeah, thanks for setting it up. Take care.
Thank
Happy
you.
Monday.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Take care.